welcome back. Thank you for joining me for another video out in the garden. So I'm over by where my tomatoes and my potato plants are growing, and I am concerned about the amount of rain we've been having and that the leaves of the two types of plants are touching. So I wanted to come in and clear out a bit of a gap between these two plants to make sure that there's still some airflow, trim back any additional branches on the tomatoes as well, and just make sure overall that the health of the tomatoes and the potatoes look good. I have a bunch of flowers which you really can't see on both the potatoes and the tomatoes, so I expect to have some small tomato buds showing pretty shortly. But I just wanted to widen the gap between where they were, and if you can look to the right of the trellis, you see that I was able to make quite a substantial gap between the two, therefore ensuring that there was some airflow between that area. With my squashes and gourd, what I'm focusing on at the moment is making sure that I single stem them. Last year I did a horrible job at maintaining underneath the trellis or right at the base of the plant. So I had stems growing all over the place. I didn't know how many tendrils had branched off. So I am making an effort this year to ensure that 2 or 3 vines trellis up the actual structure and that I don't have anything trellising along the bottom. This is also to help take care of pests. And I'm also covering the stem an additional little bit, hoping that it extends the branches out. If a tendril comes off, I'm going to plant that to give an additional root system for this plant. But I just wanted to zoom in on what I'm actually doing. I'm just removing these extra leaves and exposing more of the main stem of the plant. If there was an additional tendril branching off, I cut it off for right now. Once it gets closer to the trellis, I have no problem with it going up the trellis with multiple stems. And I did the same thing with my cucumbers, really just taking out the bulk of those leaves. This is going to help me when it comes for looking out for pests. It's actually going to help me with all the fungal diseases that help out. It'll be a lot easier to spray. In a previous video, I did mention that I was going to leave whatever was growing in the compost bin alone and just see what type of bonus harvest I could get. But as the weeks have gone by and I've looked at the amount of tomatoes that are growing in the compost bin, I cannot go ahead and allow this to continue to grow. So what I'm removing is just the tomato plants from underneath. I do not want to encourage any other animals to come into my yard, and I know that I would not be taking care of the tomato vines, and they will fruit no matter what I do. I don't have to pollinate them or do anything. So to avoid dealing with any additional pests that will come around because I left the tomatoes, I'm just going to add them to the far left compost bin, which is where I'm putting all my new materials in for this season. There are still some squash and there is the sunflowers that I am not touching. They get to stay. They're going to grow through their whole life cycle. But something like the tomato, I just can't leave it there. I just don't want to deal with the pest problem that it may create. So I've made the decision to remove that, but only that. The next day, I went to trellis number 2, where all my larger gourds were, and made sure to start attaching them to the trellis. Since these are thicker vines, they won't naturally wind themselves around, so I do have to stay on top of this, which I didn't do last year, but I do have to stay on top of pruning these as well as making sure I train them up the trellis. So that's what I was doing here, and everything looks good. I'm starting to see the beginnings of flowers that are coming up, so I'm excited for what's going to happen here. Although I believe that for the cream of the crop, which grew like a vine last year, this year those plants are looking like they are bushing out instead. So I may have to rethink what I'm going to do for some of these. So I didn't attach every single one, just the ones like towards the front where you see the melons. I definitely made sure that they were connected to the trellis and making sure to train them up it. So a bit of bad news in the garden. I didn't get to have a good carrot harvest because the carrots started to bolt with the crazy spring weather between the abnormal frost and then going right from 60 degrees to 90 degrees. The carrots didn't get to be a good size before they started to go to seed. So the Parisian, which are supposed to be small, are much smaller than expected. The cilantro as well just went to bolt. So I'm gonna have plenty of seeds to collect from these, but I didn't get to have any type of spring harvest for the cilantro, making it more like a fall weather crop for me if the season stayed the same for next year. Over on the blueberry side, the berry patch side, this berry also was damaged from the weekend that we got abnormally high heat. So I'm just going to take off from the dead part of the stem, remove that completely because I don't want the plant to try to revive that. That's not going to come back. I'm just going to focus on taking care of my blueberries, making sure they make it through the season for those that have fruited. You can see the plant to the left does have fruit, and I hope to have a somewhat decent harvest for that. The final sad news story are the pineapples. So I don't know if it was my error, I don't know if the cover blew off, but when it was acclimating, these got scorched. So you could see it varies down the line. The sugarloaf, which weren't doing too great, got damaged pretty badly. But the good news and the bad news is that those plants are green in the interior, like it's saving its energy. So I'm gonna come in and clip those branches off at some point. But they do also have little pups on the side of them. So maybe the pups will survive having been acclimated. But that's the status of the pineapples at this point, so I won't be updating that much, sadly. But that's the updates that I have today for the garden. Thanks for sticking to the end. I do hope you've enjoyed the content. Please like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.